All right, the only problem with the gradient fill inside the eye so far is that it should be a radial gradient instead of a linear one, as we can see when I press Control-Y or Command-Y on the Mac to expose the tracing template, which is secretly a good thing because we have even more control over radial gradients when working with the gradient tool. All right, so I'll just go ahead and press Control-Y or Command-Y on the Mac to switch back to the preview mode, and I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out. Now we're going to start things off by modifying the radial gradient that's assigned to the face. And so I'll go ahead and press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac to temporarily access my last used arrow tool, which happens to be the black arrow. And then I'll click inside that background shape, and then I'll release the Control key or the Command key on the Mac to switch control back to the gradient tool. All right, now notice we still have that same annotator, and so I can move the gradient by dragging this large circle, or I can scale the gradient by dragging the square at the end. I don't really want to do either of those things though, so I'll press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac a couple of times in order to undo those changes. And then I'll move my cursor slightly beyond the square handle and I'll drag it up like so in order to change the angle of the gradient. Now, so far it's not really making any difference, but it will in just a moment. And so I'm going to drag this guy up to the top, and if I want to constrain the angle to exactly vertical, then I would press and hold the Shift key. Now notice when you create a radial gradient, you're painting the image with concentric rings of color, starting at the center and progressing all the way out to the perimeter of the shape. And currently it's happening in even circles. But let's say you want to redistribute the colors. In that case, you have this additional circular handle. And if you drag on it, notice that you're going to extend the gradient downward. And you're going to do so unevenly. So notice that the colors are transitioning slowly up here at the top of the shape and much more quickly down here at the bottom. And that's because we're relocating the first ring of color, and then it's going out like this and getting bigger and bigger as it goes upward. And I can increase the effect even more if I drag this down further, so we have just a little bit of orange down here at the bottom and lots of orange up at the top of the shape. All right, but I don't want to go quite that crazy with the effects, so I'll go ahead and drag this guy back up to about this location right there. And I also want to keep things straight. So I'll move my cursor back up above the square, and I'll press the Shift key as I scoot it over so that the gradient is once again exactly vertical. All right, now let's go ahead and switch back to the eye. I'll go ahead and Control or Command click on it in order to select it, and then I'll zoom in on the shape. And I'll switch the type from linear to radial like so. And notice the big problem that we have right now. We've got a circular gradient inside of a very elliptical shape. And that's not really going to work for us. So the first thing I'm going to do is rotate this guy upward like so. And I'm pressing the Shift key as I do so to constrain the angle of the gradient to exactly vertical. And now I'll go ahead and drag this top square almost all the way to the top of the eye. And now notice these handles right here. This guy down here at the bottom, at least it's currently at the bottom, allows me to scale the gradient proportionally. That's not what I want to do, however, so I'll go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that change. Instead, I want to drag this handle, and notice when I hover over it that I see an arrowhead with a little ellipse next to it, which shows me that when I drag this handle, I can change the aspect ratio of this shape. And I'm going to take it to about here, at which point you can see a new aspect ratio listed here inside the gradient panel. And that way, if you happen to know a better value, you can go ahead and dial it in. For example, I might take this value up to 38% instead, just to increase the width ever so slightly. And then the final thing I want to do is drag this bottom circle right there down to about this location so that the colors are transitioning more rapidly at the bottom of the shape than up here at the top. And that'll give us this big shadow at the top of the eye. And now, just to make sure things are nice and straight, I'll drag just above the square widget while pressing the Shift key to constrain the angle of the gradient to exactly vertical. And those are the special ways that you can use the gradient tool along with the gradient annotator when working on radial gradients here inside Illustrator.